Welcome to Play Practice Play Skill Acquisition Series Volume 2. This is Coach Lou Mignon. I'd like to thank you for participating with Volume 1 of this series, and I thought that it would be fitting to begin Volume 2 by looking back and summarizing our previous discussions before exploring the fundamental principles of the self-determination theory and a correlation to motivation and skill acquisition through play, practice, play. Methodologies have been formulated over the past several decades with intentions to develop skillful players. Each time period offered methods that reflected different paradigms of thinking. These models of thought have evolved over time through continued research, practical application, analysis, and fine-tuning to meet the demands of the modern game played throughout the world. We can compare this progression to the emergence of the smartphone as a result of technological advances in mobile and cellular communication. Soccer was viewed fundamentally as a technical game during the late 1960s and through the 1970s. Separate training isolated technique from the other components. Players worked through drills of repetition within block practices and were exposed to limited amounts of free player scrimmaging. Lines, laps, and lectures provided the layout for this approach that disassociated the technical, tactical, physical, and mental segments of training. Economical training was introduced in the 1980s and practiced through much of the 2010s. It was during this time period that the game was being increasingly viewed as an interaction between multiple components. The design of training sessions reflected this concept through activities that paired or grouped components and sought to replicate aspects of the game environment, such as natural fluctuations of time and space, opposition, direction, and the need to perceive and problem solve individually and collectively. Extensive research and analysis conducted by the United States Soccer Federation has identified 6 key qualities of the U.S. soccer player. These key qualities are prioritized in terms of the need for coaches to create environments that facilitate the development of skillful players that can effectively read and understand the game and make decisions. It is through these capacities to recognize cues and anticipate that the player can take initiative and proactively create opportunities instead of simply reacting. We now practice a holistic approach, recognizing that decision-making by the player is of the highest order, and the game is fundamentally tactical in nature. Training the technical aspects within game situations that simultaneously fire upon all 4 components will make it a skill. The terms technique and skill are sometimes interchanged, however, a clear differentiation should be drawn. Technique is a form of movement focused upon designated mechanics and performed or practiced within an isolated environment. Skill, on the other hand, involves player actions aimed at solving problems as they naturally occur within the context of the game. Skills are used to execute decisions based upon reading and understanding one's surroundings. Technical training focuses upon an ideal movement and relies heavily upon the coach to instruct, demonstrate, and correct while players copy. Skill training, in contrast, encourages players to explore, discover, and learn independently to solve problems within the game. The coach serves as a facilitator of this meaningful learning environment. The most powerful learning environment for skill acquisition, therefore, allows players to experience the game and make their own decisions to solve problems based upon reading and understanding each moment. Skill enrichment is stimulated through risk-taking, making mistakes, and self-correction. The environment should be fun, encourage creativity, and ultimately build self-esteem and cultivate independent critical thinkers. Play, practice, play addresses the basic needs of players, which are fun and development. It places the player at the center of all decision making within the context of a fun game environment that addresses skill acquisition. Play, practice, play implements experiential learning that is holistic and reality-based. The methodology has been constructed with the U.S. Soccer grassroots player development philosophy as its framework. At the grassroots level, children learn and develop to their full potential through game-like experiences in an enjoyable environment that supports individual growth. The big picture at the current moment is quite alarming. 3/4 of youth players drop out of the game by the age of 13, and the primary reasons for leaving are not having fun and not developing the skills to advance. This same dropout statistic is shared by other organized youth sports in our country. This factor, combined with frightening data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, distinguishing this current generation as having a shorter life expectancy than their parents, due in part to less active lifestyles and rising levels of obesity. Blocked or drill-based practices that stifle freedom of player movement and actions, decision-making, creativity, and game realism are not fun and will not facilitate the development of skills that encompass the constant process of reading, recognizing, understanding, deciding, executing, and reflecting. These types of environments, unfortunately, are still rather common across America. Recognizing these enormous challenges, we strive to unite our action steps with a common goal to make soccer the preeminent sport in the United States, because we know the benefits that the beautiful game can bring to people. Soccer, to become our nation's preeminent sport, will have to be the most played, the most respected, the most engaged, the most beloved, and the most fun. We, as members of the American youth coaching community, play a vital role in bringing this goal to fruition. Our call to action is to improve, grow, and perform as we work together to build better player-centered environments. The Play Practice Play methodology offers a holistic structure and approach to experiential learning that places the player at the center of all decision making within a fun, challenging, motivating, and reality-based environment. The self-determination theory helps us to understand how motivation works through the meeting of basic psychological needs. The primary psychological need to stimulate motivation is autonomy, and this involves the personal freedom to make one's own decisions. Relatedness is a feeling that we are all part of a group, and our collaborative efforts are aimed at reaching agreed upon goals and objectives. Competence relates to the feeling of success in response to challenges that are linked to our current level of mastery. Play Practice Play is a methodology employed to create the most powerful learning environment for skill acquisition, sparks motivation within grassroots players through satisfying their basic psychological needs, accentuated by the self-determination theory. The game-like environment is part of the 5 standard and necessary elements of each training activity within Play Practice Play, and grants to players autonomy to make their own decisions. Guided questions are asked to support independent thought and problem solving. All Play Practice Play sessions are built around one of 6 team training session goals, 3 for attacking and 3 for defending. Corresponding objectives, player actions, and team tactical principles establish relatedness and focal points for joint efforts. The phases of Play Practice Play integrate team cooperation and interaction between functional groups, such as the goalkeeper and backs and midfielders, and midfielders and forwards. The Play Practice Play methodology calls upon the coach to continually observe and adapt the team structures and/or activity conditions to ensure optimal levels of repetition and challenge for the players based upon their current level of mastery. Facilitating an environment that offers opportunities for success to overcome a fitting degree of challenge introduces a sense of competence and confidence. This concept is activated in Play Practice Play, particularly during the practice phase, that is planned with a core activity and alternative adaptations in the forms of less challenging and more challenging activities. One key takeaway for coaches with respect to the designing of soccer environments for grassroots players is the importance of fun. Fun is the single largest predictor of sport commitment and sustained participation in childhood and through adolescence, and the lack of fun is the #1 reason for dropout from organized team sports. Another consideration for coaches of grassroots players is the significant association between challenge and motivation. Players challenged with the autonomy to make their own decisions take initiative and be proactive, and assume responsibility for their contribution to team efforts toward a defined goal are fueled with an intrinsic and valuable form of motivation. The self-determination theory applied within the practical setting of play, practice, play effectively combines a fun environment with an appropriate level of challenge to support the basic psychological needs of grassroots players: autonomy, relatedness, and competency. I'd like to acknowledge those who have contributed to the research-based content within this presentation. Director of Coaching Barry Pauls, Grassroots Coach Educator Zach Crawford, and the entire Coaching Education Department of U.S. Soccer are at the forefront in creating player-centered environments throughout our country and making soccer the preeminent sport in the United States. Dr. Amanda Visick and her colleagues at George Washington University continue to explore the motivation for participation in youth sports and enhance our understanding of the fun integration theory and their fun maps. Psychologists Dr. Edward Deasy and Dr. Richard Ryan have introduced the self-determination theory and expanded upon three basic psychological needs for human motivation: autonomy, relatedness, and competence.